I had written the letter twice and burned it once, and the second time I sealed it before I could think better of it, because a man who lives alone long enough learns that thinking better of things is mostly how he stays alone. The advertisement ran 4 lines in a Kansas City paper that found its way west tucked under a sack of seed corn. Wanted, a wife. A widower with a sound ranch in Sorrel Valley, 40 and able, seeks a plain, sensible woman, quiet of habit, willing to keep a house and hold her peace. No fortune offered but a roof, a name, and honest work. I read it back to my dog, who had no opinion, and I posted it the next morning before the feeling left me. I will tell you now, before I tell you anything else, that I got exactly none of the things I asked for, and that it was the luckiest day of my life. The trouble I wanted a wife to forget was older than my wanting one. Antler Creek came down out of the high rocks at the north end of the valley and ran the length of it before it went off to wherever creeks go, and every acre of grass worth grazing drank from that water. My place, the Long M, sat on the upper bend. Royce Hatcher's quarter circle H sat below me, and his cattle drank what passed me by. For most of 20 years that had been a fact and not a fight. Then a dry summer came, the kind that cracks the ground and turns the grass the color of old straw, and my father, who was alive then and meaner than the drought, dug a holding pond on the upper bend and held the water back to save our stock. Hatcher's father rode up with a rifle across his saddle. Words were said that should not have been said. A fence was cut. A steer was shot. Nobody could ever after say who started it, only that it had started, and that it had outlived both the men who started it, and that Royce and I had inherited it the way you inherit a bad knee. By the time I posted that letter, my father was 3 years in the ground, and I had run the Long M alone through 2 more dry summers, and I had stopped speaking to Royce Hatcher, except through the lawyer in Bracken Falls and the occasional cut fence. The feud had become the shape of my days. I dammed the creek a little in July and let it go in September and dared him to say a word, and he dammed his own draw and ran his cattle close to my line and dared me back, and the both of us spent money we did not have on a Bracken Falls attorney named Pickett who grew fat on our spite. I told myself I hated Royce Hatcher. The truth, which I would not have admitted to the dog, was that I was tired clear down to the bone, and that a feud is a poor thing to come home to, and that the house was very quiet at night. So I sent for a wife to make the quiet bearable, and I was particular about it, the way a man is particular about a horse he means to work and not look at. Plain, I had written. Sensible. Quiet. I did not want a pretty woman who would expect things of me I no longer had to give. I did not want a clever woman who would see all the way down into how empty the place had gotten. I wanted somebody who would cook a decent supper and keep her thoughts to herself, and let me be the silent, hard, capable man I had spent 20 years becoming. I wanted, God help me, to be left alone with company in the room. The letter that came back was short and the hand was very fine. It said only that the writer was a woman of 31, unmarried, in good health, that she could read and cipher and keep accounts, that she had buried no husband but had buried most of her prospects, and that she would come west on the spring stage if I still wished it. She signed it D. Forsyth. There was nothing plain about the penmanship, and that should have warned me, but a man who has decided to be lonely is not a careful reader of warnings. I wrote back yes. I did not ask what she looked like. I told myself I did not care, and in that at least I was telling the truth. The stage came into Bracken Falls on a Thursday in April, and I was there with the wagon and a clean shirt, and a face I had set into the expression of a man doing a sensible thing. The town was the usual 2 streets of false fronts and dust, the Mercantile, the bank with its new brick face that the rest of the buildings envied, Pickett's law office, the church that doubled as everything else on the days it was not a church. I stood by the wagon and watched the stage roll in trailing a cloud, and I composed myself to meet a plain, quiet, sensible woman who would keep her peace. The first thing she did when the driver handed her down was drop her carpetbag in the dirt, look up and down the whole sorry length of Bracken Falls, and say, to nobody, to the town itself, well, they certainly didn't oversell it. I had not yet said a word. She turned and found me by the wagon, took in the clean shirt and the set face and the wagon and the man, and something moved behind her eyes that was not fear and was not hope, but was a great deal like amusement holding very still. "You'll be Mr. March," she said. "I will be," I said, which was a foolish thing to say, and I knew it the instant it left me, and she knew it too, and one corner of her mouth went up about 1/4 of an inch and stayed there. Della Forsythe was not plain. I want to be honest about that, even though I have spent years pretending I noticed her sense before I noticed her face, because the truth is I noticed both at once and they were the same thing. She was tall for a woman, near as tall as me, with dark hair pinned up under a traveling hat that had given up somewhere around Dodge, and a long straight nose, and gray eyes that took the measure of a thing and reported back to her and waited. She was not pretty the way the saloon girls in their paint were pretty. She was handsome the way good land is handsome, the kind you have to look at twice before you understand it is worth more than the showy kind. And she was looking at me as though she had read my 4-line advertisement very carefully and arrived at a number of conclusions about the man who wrote it, none of which flattered him. "You wrote that you wanted a quiet woman," she said, as I loaded her bag into the wagon. There was just the one bag and a small wooden trunk, and the trunk was heavy in a way that meant books. "I did. I should tell you before we go any farther that I am not one." She climbed up onto the wagon seat without waiting for my hand, which I had not offered, which I noticed I had not offered, which annoyed me. I can be silent when I have nothing to say. I have rarely found myself in that condition. If quiet was the chief thing you were after, you'd have done better with a dog, and they're cheaper to keep. "I have a dog," I said. "Then your needs are already half met," said Della Forsythe, and folded her gloved hands in her lap and looked straight out over the mule's ears at the road, and I climbed up beside her and clucked the team into motion, and could not for the life of me think of a single thing to say. It is 11 miles from Bracken Falls out to the Long M, and we covered the first 3 of them in a silence that I had asked for and was now choking on. The country opened up the way it does once you leave the town behind, the sage and the bunchgrass running up to the red rock rims, the line of greener brush that marked Antler Creek winding down the middle of the valley like a seam. I am a man who loves that country, and I have never had the words for it, and I did not try to find them then. But I watched her look at it. She had stopped looking amused. She was looking at the valley the way she had looked at me on the platform, taking its measure, and somewhere around the 4th mile she said, quietly, not to needle me, "It's beautiful. You didn't say it was beautiful." "Didn't think to." "No," she said. "I don't suppose you did." And she went back to looking, and the silence after that was a different kind of silence, and I drove the rest of the way feeling like a man who has been seen through a window doing something he would rather not have been seen doing. The house was a good house. I will give my father that much. He built well even when he was building for spite. 2 rooms below and a loft above, stone chimney, a porch that faced the creek, a barn and corrals, and a bunkhouse where my one hand, an old waddy named Dempsey who had worked for my father and stayed on out of habit, kept his bedroll and his opinions. The yard was swept. I had swept it myself, which I had told myself was because a wagon would track it up otherwise, and which was a lie. Della climbed down from the wagon and stood in the swept yard and turned a slow circle, the porch, the creek, the rims going pink in the late light, the barn, the man. "You keep it well," she said. "It keeps itself well, or I'd not keep it." That's not an answer, but I'll take it for one. She picked up her own carpetbag again before I could reach it. "Where do I sleep, Mr. March? And let's neither of us pretend the question's anything but practical, because I rode 4 days on a stage, and I am too tired to be coy, and I doubt you've got coy in you." I had thought about this. I'm ashamed to say I had thought about it a good deal on the 11 miles, in the way a decent man does and then is ashamed of. "The loft's made up," I said. "It's yours and it locks from the inside. There's a latch. I put it on yesterday. I had. I had spent an hour on that latch, planning the wood so it would seat true, and I had not let myself think about why a man would spend an hour making sure his wife could lock him out. Something in her face eased that I had not known was tight. "We're not married yet," she said. "No, preacher comes through Sundays, or doesn't depending. There's no hurry I know of." I had meant it to come out hard and businesslike, and it came out instead gentle, and I heard it come out gentle and could not call it back. She looked at me a moment longer than was comfortable. "No," she agreed. "I don't suppose there's any hurry at all." And she went up into the loft with her bag and her heavy trunk of books, and I stood in the yard until the light was clean gone, and the dog came and leaned against my leg, and I said to him, "Well," and he had, as ever, no opinion. She was not what I asked for. I had asked for a woman who would let me stay the man I was. What I got was a woman who, within a week, had reorganized my kitchen, found 2 years of unpaid accounts I had been ignoring by stuffing them in a coffee tin, learned the names of every horse in my remuda and most of their faults, beaten Dempsey twice at checkers, and once at an argument about the Book of Job, and asked me 11 questions about Royce Hatcher that I did not want to answer. That last is where the rest of it starts, so I will go there. We were not yet married. We had settled into a strange, careful arrangement, the two of us, a kind of truce in the house while the war went on outside it. She slept in the loft behind her good latch. She cooked, and she cooked far better than I deserved, and she would not let me eat standing up at the counter the way I had for 3 years, but made me sit at the table across from her, and she talked. Lord, but she talked. She talked about books she had read and a school she had taught at in Missouri before the school had closed and the town with it, and about her father who had been a printer and had taught her to set type and read 3 things at once and never trust a man who would not show you his ledger. She did not talk to fill the silence. She talked because she had things to say and had spent, I gathered, a great many years in places where a woman with things to say was an inconvenience, and she had decided somewhere on the long road west that she was done being inconvenient by being quiet. I found, to my considerable irritation, that I had begun to look forward to supper. "Who is Royce Hatcher?" she asked one evening, "and why does Dempsey spit when he says the name?" "Neighbor," I said, "below me on the creek." "That's not why he spits." I cut my meat. "It's an old business, it doesn't concern you." "I live here," said Della. "I am to be your wife. Everything that costs you money concerns me, and that lawyer in town concerns me, because I found his bills in the coffee tin and they would feed this ranch for a year." She set down her fork. "How much have you paid Mr. Pickett in the last 3 years, Mr. March?" I did not know exactly. That was the shameful part. I knew it was a great deal, and I had stopped looking, the way you stop looking at a wound that is not going to kill you and is not going to heal. "Enough," I said. $340, said Della Forsyth. I added the bills. $340 to a man whose entire usefulness to you consists of being paid to be angry on your behalf, and I'll wager Mr. Hatcher has paid him near as much to be angry on his. I had never thought of it that way. I had thought of Pickett as my lawyer, my weapon, my edge. I had not once considered that he was also Hatcher's neighbor, and that a lawyer in a town the size of Bracken Falls cannot afford to truly win a case for one client if it ends the quarrel that is feeding him from both sides. The thought sat in me like a stone. "It's the water," I said finally. "It's always been the water. He says I dam the creek and starve his stock. I say he runs his cattle on my grass when his own dries up. His father and mine cut each other's fences and shot each other's steers, and we kept it going because—" I stopped. Because stopping felt like losing," I said, and it was the truest thing I had said to anyone in years, and I had said it to a woman I had known 11 days, across a table, over a meal she had cooked, and I felt the saying of it loosen something in my chest that had been clenched so long I had forgotten it was a fist. Della was quiet for a moment. It was, I think, the first time I had seen her choose to be quiet. "Stopping isn't losing," she said. Stopping is the only way anybody's ever won anything worth keeping. She picked her fork back up. Eat your supper. It's getting cold, and I'll not have it said I married a man who let good beef go to waste over an argument his daddy started. We were married that Sunday, as it happened. The preacher did come through, a circuit man named Caulfield with a tired horse and a kind face, and he married us in my front room with Dempsey for a witness and the dog asleep by the fire. And Della wore a gray dress that was not a wedding dress and stood very straight and said her vows in a clear voice that did not waver, and I said mine in a voice that did. When it was done, Caulfield shook my hand and said, "Lo, you got a good one, March," and rode off to wherever circuit preachers go, and I stood in my front room a married man, and my wife took off her good gray dress's collar and rolled up her sleeves and said, "Right. Where do you keep the rest of those bills, because the coffee tin can't be all of it?" And I laughed. It surprised the both of us. I had not laughed out loud in that house since Caroline died, and Caroline had been gone 9 years, and the sound of it was rusty and strange, and Della turned and looked at me as though I had done something remarkable, which I suppose, in that house I had. That was the way of our first weeks. She would say a true thing plainly, and it would knock loose some old fixed thing in me, and I would feel younger and angrier and more alive than I had felt in a decade, and I did not know whether to thank her or to put her back on the stage. She was nothing I had asked for. She would not keep her peace. She had opinions on the placement of the woodpile and the management of the home pasture, and the moral failings of every man in the territory who had ever taken money to keep two neighbors at each other's throats. She did not defer to me. She argued with me, and worse, she was right about an unsettling proportion of the things she argued about, and a man's pride is a tender thing, and mine had not been argued with in years. And she was not, as I had feared, blind. She saw all the way down into how empty the place had gotten, just as I had dreaded. The difference, which I had not foreseen, was that she did not flinch from it or pity me for it. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work on it, the way she had got to work on the kitchen and the accounts, as though my loneliness were simply another untidy room that wanted setting right. Now I will tell you about Ambrose Pell, because I have circled him long enough, and because I did not see him for what he was until my wife held him up to the light. Pell had come to Sorrel Valley 2 years back and bought the bank in Bracken Falls, the one with the new brick face. He was a smooth, soft-handed man with a gold watch chain and a way of agreeing with everything you said while somehow leaving you poorer for the conversation. He had loaned money to half the valley, to me among them, a note against the spring herd that I had taken when the second dry summer cleaned me out. He was friendly. That was the thing about him, the thing that fooled me and fooled Royce Hatcher and fooled the whole valley. He was friendly to everyone, and he listened, and he remembered. And when you complained to him over a glass of his good whiskey about your neighbor and the water, he would shake his head and pour you another and say, "Well, March, a man can only take so much," and you would ride home feeling that someone at last understood your grievance, and you would dam the creek a little higher the next July. Della met him the first time we went into town together, a month after the wedding, to settle some of the worst of the accounts. He came out of the bank to greet us on the boardwalk, all warmth, and took my hand in both of his and said how glad he was to see me settled, how a good wife was the making of a man, and he bowed over Della's hand with a courtliness that was a degree too smooth, and she let him, and she smiled, and she said all the right pleasant nothings. And in the wagon on the way home she said, without preamble, "That man is robbing the whole valley, and you've all been too busy hatting each other to notice." Pell, I near dropped the lines. He's the only man in Bracken Falls who's ever given me a fair shake. He carried my note when nobody else would. At what interest? I told her. She went very still. And Mr. Hatcher, she said, does Mr. Hatcher bank with Mr. Pell? I'd imagine everybody does. There's only the one bank. And the more you two fight, said Della slowly, working it out aloud the way her printer father had taught her to, setting the type of it letter by letter, the more money you each spend on Mr. Pickett, and the more cattle you each lose to cut fences and shot steers and stock that can't get to water, and the thinner your herds get, and the harder it gets to make a payment on a note at that interest. And whose note is it when you can't pay? Who holds the paper on the long M and the quarter circle H both? The wagon had stopped. I had stopped it without meaning to. The mules stood in the road and switched their tails, and the valley ran green and gold down to the creek, my creek, Hatcher's Creek, and I sat there with the lines slack in my hands and felt the bottom drop out of 20 years. "He's not stoking it," I said, "but it came out weak." "He doesn't have to stoke a fire that's already burning," said Della. "He only has to keep handing you both more wood and telling each of you the other man lit it. Mr. March, I have known men like Ambrose Pell my whole life. They are not in the business of cattle or banking. They are in the business of patient men who profit when their neighbors are at war. He wants this valley, both ends of it. And the cheapest way to buy land is to wait until the men who own it have ruined each other paying him interest, and then take it for the price of the notes." She turned on the seat to face me. "When does your note come due?" "Fall," I said. "After the gather, I sell the herd, I pay the note." "And if the herd is thin? If you've lost stock all summer to a feud, and the price is down because everyone in the valley is selling thin cattle at once because everyone in the valley is in the same trap?" I did not answer her. I did not have to. We both knew. I clucked to the mules and drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was not the comfortable kind we had grown into, but the old cold kind, and it was not Della I was cold toward. It was myself. 20 years. 20 years of being a hard, capable man, of being right, of being damned if I'd be the one to fold. And the whole time a soft-handed man with a gold watch chain had been quietly counting the days, until I and my enemy had bled each other dry enough to be picked up cheap. I am not a quick man. I want that understood. I did not ride straight to Royce Hatcher and shake his hand and end it that afternoon, the way it would happen in a story told for children. I sat with it for 3 days. I was angry, and most of my anger had nowhere to go, because the man I was angriest at was a man I had been for half my life. And it was Della who got me off the dime, and she did it not by arguing for once, but by laying the thing out where I could not look away from it. She had spent those 3 days in my front room with the lamp burning late, every account and bill and note I owned spread across the table, and her father's habits in her hands, and on the 3rd evening she called me in and showed me what she had built. She had drawn it all out on a sheet of butcher paper in that fine printer's hand, what I owed and what I'd paid Pickett and what the interest came to, and beside it in a second column what she had been able to learn or guess about Royce Hatcher's situation, which was, near as she could tell, the mirror of mine. 2 columns, 2 men, both bleeding into the same cup, and the cup had Ambrose Pell's name on it. "I can't prove all of it," she said. "Some of it's guessing, but the guessing's sound, and the part I can prove is bad enough. Mr. March." She had still not in all those weeks taken to calling me Gideon, and I had not asked her to, and I found that I wanted her to, and the wanting surprised me. "Gideon," she said then the first time, watching my face when she said it, "I did not come west to watch a good man lose a good ranch to a thief, because he was too proud to talk to the man on the other side of the creek. I have watched too many good things lost that way. My father lost his press that way, to a smiling man with paper. I will not watch it again. So I am going to ask you to do the hardest thing I think you have ever done, which is to ride down to the quarter circle H and knock on Royce Hatcher's door and say the words, 'I think we have both been played for fools.' And I am going to come with you, because I do not trust the 2 of you not to start shooting before either of you finishes a sentence." I looked at the butcher paper a long time. Then I looked at my wife, who was nothing I had asked for, who would not keep her peace, who had taken the wreck of my pride and my accounts and my 20-year war, and laid them out plain on a sheet of paper until even a hard man could see the truth of them. "Caroline used to say I was the stubbornest man God ever made," I said. "She wasn't wrong." "No," I said, "she wasn't. I rolled up the butcher paper careful, the way you roll up something you mean to keep. We'll go in the morning. Royce Hatcher met us in his yard with a rifle, which I had expected, and which Della had expected, which was why she had insisted on coming, and on coming up the lane ahead of me with her hands plainly empty and her chin high. He was a big man gone gray, a few years older than me, with a face seamed deep by the same sun and the same spite, and a wife, Ruth, who came out onto the porch behind him drying her hands on her apron, and two near-grown children behind her, a boy and a girl, watching the man from the Long M ride into their yard for the first time in living memory with something other than a lawyer's letter. "You've got nerve, March," Hatcher said. The rifle was not pointed at me, but it was not pointed at the ground either. "I've got nerve and a sheet of paper," I said, "and I'd as soon you heard the paper before you decided about the nerve." "Mr. Hatcher," said Della before he could answer, stepping forward, and Ruth Hatcher's eyes went to her, woman to woman, the way they will. "My name is Della. I married this stubborn man a month past, and I'll tell you plainly, I've spent that month learning the shape of this feud, and I have learned something that I think will make you sick, the same as it made him sick, and the same as it will make your wife sick when she hears it. May we get down? My husband can't fight you and read you the figures at the same time, and the figures are the thing that matters. I have thought many times since about what it was that made Royce Hatcher lower that rifle. It was not me. He had hated me too long and too easily to be moved by anything I said. I think it was her. I think it was a woman walking up his lane with empty hands and a plain, true way of speaking, saying we, saying us, saying the thing that will make your wife sick when she hears it, treating Ruth Hatcher as a party to it and not a bystander. I think Royce Hatcher had been at war so long he had forgotten there was another way to be spoken to, and that being spoken to plainly as a man and not an enemy undid him faster than any argument could have. He lowered the rifle. He looked at his wife. Ruth said, "Royce, let them sit down." And that was the end of the rifle, and near enough the end of the feud, though it took the rest of the morning to bury it proper. We sat on the Hatcher's porch, and Della spread the butcher paper on the boards and walked them through it the way she had walked me through it. The two columns, the two men, the one cup with Pell's name on it. Ruth Hatcher went white. Royce went red and then very quiet. He went into the house and came back with his own coffee tin, which I tell you on my honor was a coffee tin, the same as mine, stuffed with the same bills from the same lawyer at the same fat fee. And Della added his figures to her paper in her fine hand, and when she had the whole of it down, the both of us, side by side, what it had cost us each in cattle and fees and interest over 3 years, the number was so large and so sickening that nobody said anything for a while. The boy and the girl had come out to listen. The girl, who was maybe 14, said into the silence, "So the bank man wanted you to keep fighting?" And Della said, "Yes." And the girl said, "That's the meanest thing I ever heard," with the clean fury of the young, and somehow that broke it. And Royce Hatcher put his face in his big hands and laughed the way I had laughed in my front room, rusty and awful and free, and said, 20 years. We did it to ourselves for 20 years and paid a stranger for the privilege." "You did," said Della, not unkindly. "And now you can stop. Stopping isn't losing, Mr. Hatcher. My husband had to learn that too. It took him a month and a sheet of paper. You've just done it in a morning, which I'll thank you to remember the next time you call him stubborn." We did not solve everything on that porch. The water was still the water. A dry summer was still a dry summer, and good fences and shared cattle don't appear because two men shake hands. But we made a beginning. Royce and I walked the creek together that afternoon, the first time either of us had set foot on the other's bank without a rifle since we were boys, and we looked at the upper bend where my father had built his spite pond, and Royce said, "If you'd hold it back only the worst 3 weeks of July and let it run otherwise, my stock could make it." And I said, "And if you'd not run your cattle up against my line in August, I'd have grass enough to lend you a corner of the home pasture when yours burns off." And it was that simple. It had always been that simple. It had been one conversation, one honest hour, standing between two tired men for 20 years, and the only thing that had kept us from having it was a smiling man who profited from our not having it. The reckoning with Ambrose Pell I will tell quickly, because it was Della's doing, and she would not want me to dress it up. She would not let us ride into town and confront him, which is what Royce and I, with our blood up, wanted to do. You'll accomplish nothing, she said, but to warn him, and a warned thief covers his tracks. You don't fight a man like Pell with a rifle. You fight him with paper the same as he fights you, and you bring better paper than he's got. So that is what we did. Della wrote letters. She wrote to the Territorial Bank Examiner, whose existence I had not known of, and she had, because her father had once set the type for a notice from his office. She wrote in her plain, true hand, laying out the interest Pell charged against the law's limit, which she had looked up in a book from her heavy trunk, the trunk of books I had grudged hauling up to the loft, and which it turned out held, among other things, a volume of the territorial statutes that she had carried west across 4 days of stage because, she said, a woman alone does well to know the law of wherever she lands. She got Royce and me and 4 other Valley men to write down plainly what we had each been paying and what we had each, separately, been told by Pell about our neighbors. 6 men, 6 statements, all describing the same smiling stranger, handing each of them wood, and telling each of them the other man lit the fire. The Examiner came in June. He was a dry, unhurried man who spent 3 days with Pell's books, and came out looking like a man who had found something rotten under a floorboard. And Ambrose Pell left Sorrel Valley one night before the end of the month and did not come back, and the notes he held came under the receiver's management. And the receiver, having no interest in stoking feuds, was content to let honest men pay honest notes at honest interest in honest time. I made my payment that fall out of a herd that was no longer thin, because no one had cut my fences or shot my steers in 5 months, and Royce made his, and we both of us had money left over for the first time in years, and I have never since been able to look at a smiling man with a gold watch chain without my hand wanting to check that my pockets are still where I left them. But that is the small story, the cattle and paper story, and it is not the one I set out to tell. The one I set out to tell is the one about the woman who was nothing I asked for. I had married Della Forsyth for practical reasons, or so I told myself, the same as I had built a good latch on the loft door for practical reasons. And somewhere in that spring, between the kitchen and the accounts and the porch at the quarter circle H, and the long evenings with the lamp burning low while she set the truth of my life down in her fine printer's hand, the practical reasons had quietly given way to something I did not have a word for, and was afraid to look it straight. I had loved Caroline. I want to say that plainly because it matters to what came after. I had loved my first wife, and I had buried her, and I had buried with her, I believed, whatever part of a man it is that lets him love. I had made myself hard on purpose after she died, the way you let a callus grow over a place that has been torn, and I had thought the hardness was strength, and I had carried it for 9 years, and it had cost me nothing I could see because there was no one near enough to charge me for it. And then a tall woman with gray eyes had climbed down off a stage and refused to be small, and had walked into my hard, capable, lonely life and started, without ever once asking my leave, to set it right. She did not love me yet. I knew that, and I did not blame her for it. She had married a man's advertisement and found behind it a man buried under 20 years of spite, and she had set herself to digging him out the way she set herself to any untidy thing, because it was decent and because it wanted doing, and not because she had any tender feeling for the wreck under the dirt. I told myself I would not ask for more than that. I told myself that the truce in the house was enough, the suppers across the table, the latch on the loft door staying as it always did latched. I told myself a great many sensible things, and I went on, all that spring, falling in love with my own wife and saying nothing, because I am a stubborn man and the stubbornness had simply changed its object. It was Della in the end who said the thing. Of course it was. She had never once in her life let an important thing go unsaid because saying it was hard, and she was not about to start with the most important thing. It was a night in early summer, after Pell was gone and the worst of it was over, and we had come back late from the quarter Circle H, where Ruth Hatcher had cooked the four of us a supper to mark the end of the war, the first meal a March and a Hatcher had shared since before either of us was born. We rode home under a sky thick with stars, and the valley was quiet, my creek running easy down to Hatcher's land the way it ought, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could name, like a man at peace. I put up the horses. Della went into the house ahead of me and lit the lamp, and when I came in she was standing by the table where it all had started, the table where she had laid out the truth of my accounts and the truth of the feud, and she was looking at me with that measuring look she'd had on the platform the first day, taking my measure and reporting back to herself and waiting. "Gideon," she said, "I'm going to say something, and I'd be obliged if you'd let me finish before you go hard-faced and quiet on me, because I've watched you do it all spring and it's how you hide, and I'd rather you didn't hide from this one." I stood by the door. "Say it then." "I came west because I had run out of places to be a woman with a mind," she said. "I want you to understand that. I did not come for love. I'd given up on love the way you'd given up on," she gestured at the room, the house, the whole of my buried self, "on all of this. I came for a roof and a name and honest work exactly as you advertised, and I meant to keep my side of a fair bargain and ask nothing else of it." She drew a breath. "And then I found a man behind the advertisement who was so much more than the 4 lines he wrote that it has made me angry half the spring, because it would have been a great deal simpler to do my honest work and keep my heart out of it, and you would not let me." Her voice did not waver. It was the same clear voice she'd said her vows in. "You laughed the day the preacher came. You not laughed in 9 years, you told me later, and you laughed because of something I said, and I have been trying ever since to make you do it again, and I want to know why I'd bother if I didn't." And there, only there at the very end, her voice caught just once. "If I didn't love you, Gideon March, which I do, and I'll thank you to say something now because I've gone and made myself a fool, and the least you can do is be a fool with me. I have told you I am not a quick man. I want it on the record that on this one occasion in my life I was quick enough. I crossed that room, and I took my wife's face in my 2 rough hands, the same hands that had held a rifle at Royce Hatcher's lane and signed 20 years of Pickett's bills, and built a good latch on a door so a woman could lock me out. And I said the thing I had been too stubborn to say all spring, which was, I asked for a quiet woman who'd hold her tongue, and God in His mercy sent me you instead, and you are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I have loved you since the day you dropped your bag in the dirt and said they hadn't oversold the town." And then I did not say anything else for a while, and neither did she, and the lamp burned low, and what happened after that is ours and is not for telling, except to say that the loft's good latch went unused that night and every night after, not because I asked, but because she chose freely, the way she chose everything, with her chin up and her mind made and no man's leave but her own. We were married a long time, Della and I am an old man now, telling this from the same porch that faces the same creek, and the creek still runs down past the long M to what is now the Hatcher boys' place. For Royce is gone these 10 years and his son runs the quarter Circle H, and his daughter married a March, my brother's boy. So that the 2 families that spent 20 years cutting each other's fences are now so tangled by marriage that you cannot tell at a branding which calf belongs to whom, and nobody much cares. There is a school in Sorrel Valley now, a real one with a bell, that Della built. She went back to teaching the year after we married, because a woman with a mind, she said, ought not to let it go to seed just because she'd found a man worth keeping, and I built her a 1-room schoolhouse on the flat between the 2 ranches, on neutral ground, on what had once been the most fought-over corner of the valley, and the children of both families learned their letters there, side by side, from a tall, gray-eyed woman who would not let a single one of them grow up small. She has been gone 2 years now. I will not pretend that is easy to say, but I am not the man I was when I buried Caroline. I did not let a callus grow over the place where Della was. She would not have stood for it. I can hear her plain, telling me that grief honored is one thing and grief used as a wall is another, and that she did not spend 30 years digging me out of my own hard heart to have me climb back into it the moment she was gone. So I grieve her in the open, the way she taught me to do everything in the open, and I sit on the porch in the evenings and tell the story to whichever grandchild will sit still for it. And I always tell it the same way, because it is the truest thing I know. I sent for a quiet wife who would keep my house and hold her tongue. The woman who climbed down off that stage was sharp where I wanted soft, loud where I wanted silence, and so far from biddable that she ended a 20-year war I'd called unwinnable, ran a thief out of the valley, built a school on the ground we'd bled over, and loved me so plainly and so well that she taught a stone-hearted man to laugh again at 40 and to weep without shame at 70. She was nothing I asked for. She was everything I needed. And if there is a lesson in it, for the young ones who sit on this porch and ask their grandfather why he tells the same story every time, it is only this. A man who asks for small things because he is afraid of large ones will, if he is very lucky, be sent more than he had the sense to want. I asked for quiet. I was given Della. I have thanked God for the difference every day of my life.